and welcome to the Mindset Michele TV show. We're so super excited for you to be joining us for yet again another incredible, amazingly accomplished guest today. Today we have the amazing Edwina McGlinn. Hello, Edwina.
Hi, Michele. Lovely to be here.
It's so amazing to have you on the show, Eddie, and I'm just so honoured that you're coming on and speaking to us because you're from yet another incredible and amazing specialist area. For those that aren't aware of Associate Professor Edwina McGlinn, she works in the ARMI, so not the army like you and I would normally think of, but a biological army. This is the Australian Regenerative Medicine Institute, or ARMI, ARMI, and she's a specialist in developmental genetics. So for lay people, what that means is that she looks and studies the embryo and sees how all the different parts of the body and everything gets formed from there. But I'm, so fascinated, and it's definitely not an area that I know terribly much about. So Eddie, please share with us how you came to be doing what you do and why you're so passionate about studying how we go from a baby embryo into a full-grown human being.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, first of all, thank you for having me today. It's always a pleasure to talk science. I love talking science. So I started out in 1995 with my honours in Queensland, and I was working more in cell biology. And I sort of stumbled across, there was a project happening in the bay next door to me where they were looking at gene expression, so how genes are expressed in the developing embryo. And I remember seeing this thinking, this is simply incredible. This was, back in the early days of looking at gene expression in the whole embryo. And so I sort of transitioned my PhD a little bit away from sort of the microscopic, looking more at the whole organism as it's developing. My PhD was on looking at the genes that control how many digits you have in your hands and feet. So why we have 5 fingers and not 4 or 6 or 8 fingers. And that really led me to a wonderful lab over in Boston at the Harvard Medical School, where I continued that work on limb development for quite a number of years, and then sort of transitioned over to looking at how your spinal cord and vertebral column form in the early embryo. And I guess my sort of view on it, and many people who work in developmental biology, is that we feel that if you understand how the embryo creates structures in the first place, how it gets it right most of the time, we can understand, first of all, what we call congenital malformation, so how it goes wrong, unfortunately, in certain human syndromes and certain babies. And secondly, if we have the handbook, sort of the guide as to how the embryo does it properly the first time, maybe we can redeploy that in a regenerative medicine context to treat disease.
Wow, and as I said, a really incredibly specialized area, and one that I'm fascinated by, because I don't think I've ever met somebody that has spent their life trying to unlock the code, the hidden genetic code as to how we end up with 5 fingers and 5 toes. And I know for parents with newborns, the first thing that they do is look at, is the baby healthy? Does it have 5 fingers, 5 toes? All of that. But to be studying what is the handbook, and I love that word because it really simplifies it for people, the handbook as to what is the genetic instructions in those genetic cells that says this is what you do to create 5 fingers or 4 fingers and a thumb, etc., or 5 toes, all of that sort of amazing stuff. And being a scientist and being an accomplished scientist in a biological genetics space, I'm sure that you've had some really interesting, whether it was with Harvard or throughout your career, successes and challenges, etc. What would you say that nowadays for yourself you would define as success?
Sure. So for me, success throughout my career, I believe I was thinking about this, and I think it's always been a personal thing for me. It's always been personal success. I don't believe I've really ever felt this overwhelming need to compete with others in my environment and, you know, having to rise above to be successful. That's not ever been, you know, my, you know, the way I view things. I personally think I'm actually harder on myself than anyone around me could ever possibly be. So, you know, in that sense, you know, success for me, it's about doing, for me, it's about doing a great job. And am I doing the best that I can do at that point in time? And as you say, this changes throughout your career. You know, for me, during my PhD, success was, I remember the exact moment that I would absolutely say was the most successful point of my PhD. And it was this light bulb moment when I was writing my thesis, where I put a whole bunch of, you know, information together and worked out a different way of looking at how the limb develops that no one else had ever really, you know, sort of come across before. And, you know, I drew it all out in this big diagram and, you know, on the Monday, you know, called in my supervisor and the other PhD student who was working in this area. And I sat them down and I went through this and I went through my picture and you could just see in their face the expression of, oh, wow, yeah, I think she's onto something there. And I think this is actually a good change or an important change in the way in which we look at things. So for me, that was the most successful part of my PhD. Now, I do want to say it's not that led to the biggest paper in the world or anything like that, but it for me, it was success. You know, as you go on, you know, other things become priorities. So during my postdoc, well, actually just before my postdoc, what I would say was probably the most successful part was my, you know, future supervisor, his name was Cliff Tabin. He happened to be in Queensland for a conference and I was this little PhD student and at the end of my PhD and I got half an hour with him. I didn't understand the gravity of that situation. You know, I do now. And I just had a chat with him because I love talking science. He was working on limb development. I was working on limb development. Surely we must have something to talk about. And we had a fantastic conversation for half an hour. And at the end I said, oh, well, you know, maybe I can come do a postdoc with you. And he sort of laughed and said, yes, that's not the way we do things. You know, you should apply. And he laughed his head off. And then, of course, I emailed him and then he said, absolutely, of course, you can have a job. And it wasn't until I got to Boston and I spoke with the other people that I realized the people who joined, he must get, you know, people applying for his lab literally once a day, if not multiple times a day. And here am I just asking this guy for a job. So for me, that's success because, you know, clearly I must have been able to articulate myself well enough and in this scientific context that he wanted to work with me. So, you know, it's those sorts of things that for me is success. Now, you know, my life has changed. Now I run a lab. I've been running a lab for 12 years now. So for me, success is all about, you know, the training. It's, you know, it's seeing that next generation have that light bulb moment. And, you know, and training, I'm quite, you know, I make sure that people who come out of my lab are rigorous. They have, you know, excellent scientific skills, critical thinking, all these things. And for me, that's the success and seeing them move on.
And that is I really love that because as a scientist, and I think that's the key that I'm hearing about you, Eddie, is that scientific investigation and methodology, because I know that's really important to be able to show the rigid thinking around, you know, the structures and how you've done things. But in amongst all of that, I love how you keep saying the aha moment. So when you had it yourself and now giving your people in your lab the opportunity to have that structure that you need and all of the scientific discipline, but within that to then create their own aha moments. So I really love that because I think that definition of success, especially for somebody that works and lives and breathes science, that's very much the magic, you know, the day in, day out. And I'm sure there's a lot of day in, day out, testing 1, testing 2, testing 3, et cetera, et cetera. But when you reach the aha moment, that would be such an incredible sense of success.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. And with that in mind, and that understanding that, yes, especially in that science space, it's not an overnight, and your PhD was a great example of that, where it's not an overnight, oh yeah, I think I'll draw the diagram and it will be something different. It takes a lot of time, a lot of years. So from your perspective, what sort of suggestions do you have for people around how they can create, in many ways, that discipline about creating their own mindset for success?
Sure. I think perhaps, it all takes time, of course, to work out a good strategy for yourself and understanding how you work best. For me, what I find works best is carving out specific times to do things. So yes, I have a to-do list, absolutely, that, gets things out, gets things down. I can monitor progress, that's just a basic sort of thing. But more important for me is carving out time to focus on one area of my, existence. So, at a broad level, of course, that is work and home life. I don't want to mix the two. I want to do this well. I want to do this as well as I can, and try to devote time, concentrated time to each thing rather than being all over the place. But that's the broad strokes. But when we even just talk about my roles as a scientist, I wear many hats now. And
so just before you go on to that, I think that first point is a really, really valid point, given that we now have so much working from home and so much bleeding of home into work and work into home, because I'm sure you can remember those days where you were trying to fit in some appointments because things were only open 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, and you were in an office 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. So you were trying to fit in some of those appointments, medical appointments, say, even that you needed to do because that was the only time you could see your doctor, but it was actually in work time. And now, of course, you have the bleeding the other direction, where you can be doing emails, etc., for work on the weekends and in your own time. So I think that bleeding and that mixture is very important. And why I wanted to quickly stop there was the reason for success. I might suggest part of the reason for success is that carving out time to work on one specific thing. So there's a real discipline to understanding, well, life is a bit messy and it has this and that, and that's going to happen. But carving out specific time, whether that's focusing on one project, focusing on one child, focusing on one activity at home, I think is a really important suggestion that you're making, because we can get caught up in the messiness of, mixed boundaries about things. But I'm sure for yourself, especially when you're working and thinking, well, I really need to spend some time just focusing on this problem with the children, with the research lab, whatever it might be, that carving out time is an important area.
Oh, absolutely. And it's you're not effective unless you do that. And and also it's not fair the other way. So I'm not effective as a scientist if I'm trying to organize the doctor's appointments and all this sort of stuff, but it's not really fair to the family and to my children if I am sitting there at the dinner table thinking, got to do this. And of course, there are times of the year. Right now it's grant season. I have multiple grants due, so it's very, very hard to not sit there at the dinner table thinking, oh, I've got to do this. But we just try to be really present. It may not be too much time, but we try to be present in that time, so that and then we'll go back to work after dinner, after the kids are in bed, but we try not to do it in that moment.
And that's true as well. I know with using devices, people do try to have like device-free dinners with their family.
Oh, completely. Yeah, we absolutely have device-free dinner. Yes, yeah. There's nothing at the table. Yeah,
and that's part of that idea that you're not having distractions. Yeah. So that if, especially as busy children or busy parents, you're having that time where you are with your children and checking in with each other to make sure that everything's on track, and then going and having your busy lives separately again later.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess it also extends into I think my work life as well, carving out different parts of my work life. So, I definitely wear a lot of hats, a lot of different hats. So I'm, head of research excellence for the Institute. I am head of equity, diversity and inclusion for the entire faculty, run 2 ethics committees, have honours, PhD, postdocs, master's students. And importantly, I'm still a scientist. I actually still work at the bench every now and then. And I love it. I mean, a lot of scientists sort of move away from it very quickly, but no, I don't think I'll ever move away from the actual bench science completely. But again, it's really important to cut out that time for focusing on one thing as much as I possibly can. And, it's not black and white, but yeah, doing one thing, getting it done, and then, dedicating, okay, I know I'm going to be in the lab for this one day a week, even if it's just one day, but I'm going to concentrate on that. And it just, it works a lot better.
And I guess that it's an interesting point that you beautifully raise there around wearing the different hats and having the 2 ethics committees and being heads of a number of different areas and still wanting to do some bench time. I think if people just tuned in at that bit, they might think you're a personal trainer, doing bench time. It's quite funny. But I really get it that, as a scientist, and that's your passion, keeping your finger in, it's like a GP or a specialist surgeon that is running, a department in a hospital, but still wants to keep their hand in by seeing patients every now and then to make sure they don't lose touch with that. But I was also thinking, what an amazing and incredible example you must be. So just like that really senior person, sorry, I don't remember his name, but he gave you half an hour of his time. So he modelled, if you like, that even with the busiest and most successful person that you knew, they could still find time to have a chat with you and to enjoy the conversation for that 30 minutes. You are now doing that yourself by role modeling that you can actually do all of these many different things, but through that discipline of carving out time and focusing in that time for that 30 minutes that you're with your PhD students, you are with them completely for that 30 minutes. You're not sitting there and you're distracted by this or that or whatever. So you're role modeling for them, which I think is a really lovely point around the behaviors that, you too can be really successful and be head of and doing, 10 different hats perhaps, and 10 different things that you're leading and controlling. But one of the keys to that is to actually be completely present when you're in each of those activities.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I guess you don't really think you're doing that when you're in the moment, do you?
No, and this is where it's beautiful to talk to really successful people like yourself, because you wouldn't perhaps necessarily recognize things that you do automatically because you're just doing them. But one of the things for people watching is to hear these amazing successful people that are incredibly busy, how they actually fit it all in, manage to stay sane. You don't you haven't said that you feel overwhelmed or anything like that. You're just managing what's in front of you in each moment and having boundaries like, the devices and the work for work and home for home. It's all beautiful and wonderful habits and behaviours to create that mindset for success.
Thanks.
And you were going to mention a little bit more perhaps about the wearing different hats?
I guess, yeah, it's been a nice transition actually, from, as much as I do love still being at the bench, it's also nice to develop other skills that I didn't really, wasn't necessarily working towards, taking on a couple of these roles. I definitely, had my children first and decided to, focus on that. And when my kids were sort of 3 to 5, that's when I really started taking on more, leadership roles, I would say. because I could dedicate the time, and the brain capacity, I guess, to thinking about those sort of things. And it's been really rewarding. I feel like, I've developed a lot of skills, interpersonal, strategies, and things like this outside of, the day-to-day science. So yeah, it has been really rewarding for me, even if a bit busy.
Yeah, and I get that, and children are one of those 24/7, 20+ year keeping you busy. They're not sort of a project that really comes to an end. They're an ongoing project as such. But I love how you're describing that when they do become a little bit more independent and start school, perhaps, that opportunity then for you to grow and develop as a leader in your field in other ways. And it is one of those interesting things that, especially for scientists and people that do PhDs, spending so much time focusing and specializing in like a scientific area. And then once you've completed that, then going, oh, okay, now I'm going to go and learn about leadership and growing in the leadership area. And it is interesting that whole first the learning and growth is very much that lifelong skill.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and we discuss that a lot now with the trainees that are coming through, the either masters or PhD. It's a very different world than when I finished my PhD in 2004, actually. It was a very linear road to academia. And I mean, it's wonderful now that I do try to support those who want to go on to academia. It's not an easy road, but if someone wants to, try that road, then we give them all the support. But there are many different many different areas that people can go into with a PhD. And you're completely right. It's this critical thinking that can, lead you anywhere. I mean, that skill is essential in everything. So yeah, it's very diverse now where people end up, which is great.
And I've heard some quotes or comments around how, I'm not sure if it's the same as true for PhDs, but it talks about specializing or working at something for 10,000 hours to become like a master or a specialist at it. Now, I'm not sure whether it's more or less to do a PhD, because it's quite a large commitment of time. But I guess, that successful mindset, again, is around if you want to specialize in XYZ, and for you, it's this amazing developmental genetics, then spending at least 10,000 hours, but then also recognizing, like you have, and academia really does, that once you become a technical scientific specialist, there's still these brave new worlds of becoming, a head of a research lab, or a head of this or a head of that. And so it moves on from just being in that science area, which you again have carved out and focused on for a period of time, to being in these wider and wider areas as a leader in that field.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not a easy transition for, I wouldn't say it's an easy transition for most people. Some people are born into it, but I would say by and large, it's not a straightforward transition, particularly for scientists who can be very, as you say, very focused and, a little bit blinkered sometimes. So it's not a straightforward transition, but certainly rewarding.
And what do you think quickly then might have been some of the things? Because I think what I've touched on is that it's like if somebody was, doing one career at the moment, and then through technology, circumstances, what it may be, needs to then change and shift into a different career. What do you think helped you in some of that transitional shift within what you were doing?
Certainly finding mentors at the right time and place. I'm a big fan of mentorship, as I'm sure that's in any discipline. But for me, the importance is finding the right person who can give you, the sort of support and guidance and a bit of insight specific to that stage. And I don't think that that same person necessarily, can go with you along the whole way. Everyone has different views, and you sort of, move together for a while and then separate, and then someone else might, really understand that next phase that you're going through. And so I've had wonderful mentors along the way, but it's not been one. And I think, realizing what you sort of need assistance with at that particular time is critical, first of all, and then seeking the appropriate person to help you with that aspect at that time, I think has been most beneficial for me.
I think that that's a wonderful, wonderful suggestion, especially whether it's in academia world, where you're moving from PhD speciality to learning about the leadership levels and running your own lab and those kind of next progressive steps, or if you're doing a career and through technology or whatever it might be, realizing you need to reskill to move into a different career, then finding those mentors that you so beautifully speak about is a really fabulous way to make that transition, and also do it in a way that you're talking to somebody that has gone through it before and can help you with that particular stage that you're in life.
Yeah, absolutely. But the flip side to that is also you've got to jump in the deep end. At some point, I think, if you have to be a bit brave as well, and you do have to jump in the deep end at some point and just think, well, I may not be ready, but I'm going to do it, and we'll see how things go. And, it is something you've just got to do.
So very, very true. It's just as Nike say about just doing it. So Edwina, it's been absolutely fabulous. And if people wanted to reach out to you and find out more about, developmental genetics and the embryo, what's the best way of getting hold of you?
I have a website. So in the ARMI webpage, there'll be a link to my research group, which sort of just has a brief background to the group and all of our recent papers, that we've published, so people can get a sense of the type of work that we do. They're also welcome to email me. My email is on that website as well.
Fabulous. And so ARMI again is the Australian Regenerative Medicine Institute. And not the other ARMI.
Not the other ARMI, not with a Y. And it's at Monash University.
At Monash University. How fabulous. So thank you, Edwina. And lastly, if you were to give some advice to your younger self, what perhaps might that advice be?
Oh, absolutely. Don't be too hard on yourself. I think, as I said, I am probably my strongest critic. I hold myself up to a very high level, and I think if I could tell my younger self one thing is, not to be too hard on yourself, that life is about making mistakes and enjoying those mistakes along the way. So that's what I would tell myself.
That's fabulous. And I think it's funny hearing you say about enjoy yourself and don't worry too much about the mistakes, given how successful you've been, and that you've actually completed a PhD, etc. I'm trying to think, what mistakes could you have made?
Oh, I've made many mistakes along the way, many. But nothing, nothing harmful, But you just, you keep moving forward, and everyone makes mistakes, right?
They do, and it's even interesting that you're using the word mistakes, because I'm just a little bit curious around, given that every time you make an experiment, it could be called a mistake if it fails, if you like, and you need to make like thousands perhaps to progress even a millimeter. Do you call them mistakes, or is it just an experiment?
Not in a scientific sense, in the lab. No, I don't call them a mistake, unless I had the wrong solution and I've just lost 4 days of work because I wasn't thinking straight. That's a mistake. But when you think something through, you try it and it doesn't work, that's not a mistake. That's a learning experience, and that's okay. Well, that didn't work. why didn't it work? What can we do? What can we change? Let's try it again. And we go back and we try it again. And as you say, you try again and again until you do get the situation where it works. But it's not just that it works, it's that you're confident it's working the way it should be working. You know, you can get results, anyone can get results. It's being confident that that result is the accurate reflection of the thing that you're trying to assess. And often we do science by coming at it from multiple angles. We might do an experiment to get this answer, and then we'll try a completely different experiment, and if it gets to the same answer, then I'm pretty confident that that answer is correct. We don't just, you know, and so we are quite rigorous in that sense. So no, I don't consider those things a mistake unless I've just done something stupid, and I've done many of them.
It all sounds wonderfully human to me, and wonderfully, yes, I can imagine, you know, after 4 days making a slight misjudgment and and having to start again.
Oh, there's been many moments where I've thought, oh, I might as well have just been sitting on the beach for the last 4 days. But then you just keep going.
You keep going and you learn. And even if what you've learned is that when you're distracted or tired, then that can have an effect as well. But
absolutely. Absolutely.
It's been such an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Edwina.
Thank you for having me, Michele. It was fun.
Wonderful. And to all the viewers again out there, I hope you like me a little bit more about regenerative medicine and ARMI and embryos today. And thank you so much for again tuning into the show and hearing some more incredible insights into how you too can create a mindset for success. But for now, from my heart to your heart, be great, be fabulous, and be you.